All right, good morning again, everyone. We are learning chapter 10 of Shar the book of unity and faith in God. We started a little late today just because, as I mentioned before, just trying to do some research in these intense chapters. And I think I told you once when I was after when we were starting to finish the first book, and I was already looking ahead in section two, the book we're learning now, book two. I was speaking with a few friends, asking them, what's the right sources to find information on, background and from the Rebbe, and they're like, oh, the first half of the book, that's easier to give over. The second half, from chapter seven and on, is is the harder part, and I definitely understand what they're talking about. So I thank you all for going along the ride and trying to understand as best as we can these last few chapters. But the good news is, probably after Hanukkah, maybe in the new year, we'll transition to a different a book entirely. We'll transition to Shar HaBitachon, which is one of the most famous Torah books, called the Gates of Trust in God. Oh, you have it already, Robin. Yeah, that's it.
I'm
That's cool. I
excited.
didn't even say. Awesome. How
I,
did you find it? Just
you,
from
you said what it was a couple of weeks ago, and I looked on the publisher, and then I looked
Cool.
at Amazon. It was basically the same price, but I get Amazon Prime free delivery, so I bought it from
Perfect. How much is
Amazon.
it? Perfect. How much is
It
it?
was a lot of money. What was it? I think it was $28 or $38. I know, listen, don't make the mistake I made. I got it from Amazon and they have it in two editions, the hardcover, which I got, but first I
Okay.
ordered, it said paperback and it was $10 cheaper. It must have been
Okay.
18 and the hardcover is 28. And
28.
so I
Okay.
got it and it was not just paperback, but it was like the travel edition. It was
Oh, small.
tiny. So I returned it and spent the extra $10 and got
Yeah, it's worth it.
the regular one. Yeah, totally. I might 70
Yeah,
year
but I'll
old
send it. Yeah, I'll send you a link, Vivian, just because there's so many. There's so like it's one of the most. It's a foundational Torah book that's been studied for 1,000 years by so many. There's so many different books on it. So there's a Chabad translation that I loved learning, and so we'll do that one. But I'm impressed, Robin, that you found the right one. But but anyway, I'll send out a link, God willing, in the next week or so, and you'll be able to order it. Okay, so now we're learning chapter 10. I'm going to do my best to give over. Personally, the second half I like better, but I need a cliffhanger, so we'll wait till the second half. There's just some points over there that I found to be so um, uh, relatable and enjoyable. But right now, what we're learning is chapter 10 of the book of Unity and Faith in God. The book is exactly like the title. It's all about unity in God. It's trying to delve into, and this is why it's so difficult. We're trying to delve into the essence of reality, into the essence in God, of God Himself. And the truth is, what do we know about God? We don't know God. We can never relate to God. We can never try to fathom understanding God. So really, we could just end the conversation there. But what the Alter Rebbe is trying to do is at least make us educated in being able to say we don't know God. So we're not just saying it out of ignorance, saying what's the point of exploring it when we don't know anything? We'll know as much as we can and then say, we don't know. So it's a much more enjoyable or educated way of saying, I don't know. Um, the whole book is about how to understand Hashem Echad. It means God doesn't. It doesn't just mean God is one and not two. That's for a 4-year-old to understand. But as educated as we grow and mature, we're trying to understand that a lot deeper. Um, it's to gain what we're learning is what the Alter Rebbe is trying to teach us is to gain a perspective that everything outside of God is really one with God. It's really part of God, even what seems like outside. The beginning of the book started with the world. The world seems outside of God, independent existence, but really it's all one with God. The letters of God's in the creation is actually what's giving it life, and it's totally dependent on godly energy. But as we progress throughout the book, and really specifically from chapter 7, it's much more subtle, and that's why I've been having a harder time to try to understand it myself, is we're learning how God's expressions, God's character, are really one with God. So that's a harder thing to understand, because the idea of the world being one with God, it's more relatable to us because we're within world, and what we're exploring how the world is really part of God, is we're one with God, how we are one with God. But to understand God's expression, God's character, God's defined attributes are one with God, it's where it's more subtle and harder to explain. In other words, the first half was God vis-a-vis creation. The second half of the book is God vis-a-vis himself. And that's a harder thing to explain, the unity within God himself, because we don't know God himself. Um, to start the conversation, we know the Torah tells us expressions about God. It says God is wise, God is kind, God is strong, God is vengeful, God is joyful. Throughout the Torah, there's different characters of how we see God. But in truth, it's all achdus. It's all united with God. The expressions of God are not outside of God. It's not separate from God. It's a non-composite, single plane um, entity of God. So, in other words, to quote a very deep passage of Zohar, it goes like this. I'm saying it in Aramaic and translate it. Some of you may have heard me say it before, Vivian. I'm not sure, maybe. Iu, the Aramaic is a little complicated. It's Iu v'chayoichad, Iu v'garmayichad, which means God and his lights and his energy are one. And then it says God and his tools or his vessels are one. Meaning God's vessels or characters, is the way I'm translating it here, they're all one with God. And God and his lights, his energy, are all one with God as well. In fact, right before the Alter Rebbe passed away, he wrote an essay on this Zohar, and it's very deep and lengthy. And we actually study it as part of the Tanya later on in the fifth section of the Tanya. We study that section. And the reason why it's hard for us to understand is usually if you could label something as a character, it's a separate entity than the person. You have a person who acts kind, or you can have a person who acts strict. You have a person who could be resilient, but then you have a person who could give up. So there's a person, and then there's the character that the person is putting on. So usually the way we would understand that is it's separate than the person. But by God, we're saying Hashem Echad, God is one. God and his characters are one. It's not separate. And really, that's why it's a catch-22, because as soon as you talk about a character, you're saying it's separate. But by God, we're saying it's still one. There's in Kabbalistic terms, God has sefirot. And what we're saying is God and his sefirot are all one. Whereas by us and our attributes are separate. So really, we can understand this, and the Alter Rebbe makes that clear at the end of chapter 9, that it's the secrets that we take on with faith. We don't understand God how it works, but still in chapter 10, which is what we're going to study today, we're trying to understand it as best as we can. So the chapter starts by saying that the Torah has a pattern to speak in human terminology, which means even though God is not human, God forbid, but yet, in order to make it palatable for our ears, we give God we speak about God in human terms in the Torah. Or if you saw the expression, God got angry. God doesn't get angry. But the expression is so that it could be relatable to us. And that's really the point. And in the macro, what this means is, in order to make it relatable to us, we have to give it through a worldly metaphor. So we can, relate to Torah ideas. So we need to try to also relate to the idea that God and his character are one. That's not something really relatable because by us, our characters are not one with us. It's separate. We have kindness, and then we could also have more discipline.
So how is that outside of us? I don't understand that.
Our character,
Yeah.
meaning, so that's a good question. There's the character that we have, and then there's the essence of us ourselves. Really, that's the character doesn't define who we are. We could be beyond the character that we put on. So a person could at one time be happy and another time be sad, but then there's the person that's beyond those feelings. A person has feelings, but then there's what's deeper than the feelings of the person. There's the person, the soul that's beyond the feelings.
Okay, so it's like, right, okay. So it's the soul, our Jewish soul
Yeah.
versus
The feelings or the attitude that we have. They're obviously connected to
our
us.
ego. That's part of our ego,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All those feelings. So
Our
it's
soul
our soul
powers,
okay,
the
perfect. Thank you.
expressions of the soul, right? The
Right.
soul has its expression in the 10 soul powers. But that's what we're saying by God is that the expressions of God are not outside of God. It's not separate. It's actually one with God. Hashem Echad means, whereas by us, those are outside of us that we, put on those clothes. Whereas by God, it's a non-composite single entity, God and his expressions, God and the tools that God uses. That's what Hashem Echad means on a deeper term. It doesn't just mean God and the world is one. It doesn't just mean God is one and not two gods. It means God and his expressions, God and his character is one. And that's harder for us to understand because we could put on this character or that character, but what we're saying by God is all one with God. So the Kabbalists gave us a window to try to understand what does it mean that it's all one with God. And it calls God's energy as light. In Hebrew, it's called or. Or means light. And really, there could be different ways of how to communicate. The idea of giving doesn't have to be light. A person could give, the idea of communicating with another could be in Hebrew known as hashpa'ah, which means a flow, or midot, person expressing themselves. But yeah, the Kabbalists prefer to use the term as or, God's light emanating. And the reason why the term or is more correct than other terms, rather than a flow like hashpa'ah or midot, which is expressions. Light, when a light, if you take the sun, a sun ray, the rays of the sun, if you trace it back in the source, it never looks, it will never come out as different than the source. If over here it looks like a ray of the sun, it maybe looks separate because it's outside. But if you were able to trace that ray back in the sun, all you would see is the source. The rays has nothing on their own. There's no character of the rays outside of the sun. Let me explain that again. Outside of the sun, the sun rays are called rays. But if you trace that ray back into the sun, all you would see there is the source, which means the ray is totally one with the sun. If you go back to the source, you won't see the ray as something else, something different, something outside, or something independent. All you would see is the ball of the sun. You would see only the source. Only once it comes out, from our view, it looks like separate. But from the sun ray always sees itself as connected. The sun ray never looks at itself as a separate entity. From our perspective, it looks like a separate entity. But if we were able to trace it back and look at it in the sun, we will see the truth that it's all within the source.
So wait, if we were to do that with people, how we're talking about God's attributes I'm sorry, our attributes are expressions of our soul. If we were to trace it back into us as if it were a ray of sun, we're the sun in
Yeah.
this example, and trace it back to us, what would we find? We wouldn't
So
see
let's say if
one.
a person, very good. So if a person, let's say, communicates with their words and then they offend someone, they could say, "Oh, I didn't mean it. I wasn't thinking when I was talking." So the words can have a separate entity from the person receiving it. They could look at the words as something that they misunderstood the person. They could come out as separate than the source. Whereas when you have the sun rays, the light is always just an expression of the sun. Even if from the recipient, it looks like all I see is the sun ray, I don't see the bulb, or I don't see the ball of the sun. All I see is the rays. But if you're able to go back in the source, all you would see is the ball, the source, the oneness. So the sun rays, or in the Kabbalist, or the light is the perfect way to communicate how, from our perspective, maybe the light could look separate. But from the perspective of the sun rays is never something separate. It's all within the ball of the sun. It's always connected to the source. It's one with the source. So God's expression is communicated as light to tell us that it's just like the sun rays. It's just like light. It's never a separate entity than the source. When we say God is kind, and then we say God is victorious, it talks about God as netzach, which means victory and endurance. It's not separate than God. It's all within God, Hashem Echad, and that's the example given by the Kabbalists is like light, that from the source, that's always connected in the source. So if you were to trace the Sfirot back to their source, you would see how it's all one. From our perspective, it looks like there's different Sefirot, there's different energies or expressions of God. But if you were able to look back at the source of light, you would see how it's all one. Let me explain it. This is, I think, the second half of the classes, which we're getting into now. I think it's a little easier for me to try to explain. I just wanted to, get out the idea. I guess, let me put it this way. There's what the Alter Rebbe says, which is what I just am telling you. But now it's more what I want to tell you what the Alter Rebbe is saying, which means the idea, the bigger idea. The Midrash says that God created the world with 10 character traits. There was the intellectual faculties, which we are familiar with already, which is Chachma, Bina, and Das. But then the expressions were emotive, the emotional expressions of God came out in the 7 days of creation. So on Sunday, which is when God created light, that's the expression of kindness of God in the world. On Monday, when God separated the waters to expose the earth, to make dry land, that was the idea of discipline, which is separating. On Tuesday, which is the midah, the attribute of tiferet, which means harmony or beauty, that's when God created all the plants and the vegetation and the grass and the beautiful flowers. The beauty of the world came on Tuesday because that's the attribute of God, of beauty, of tiferet, of harmony. So in every day of creation, you see another main expression of God coming out. And actually, Shabbat, which is the seventh day, is known as Malchut, which we studied about in previous chapters. God as king, God's kingship. That's why on Shabbat in our Amidah, in our prayers, we refer to God as king often. I mean, we do that every day, but on Shabbat it's highlighted. The Shechina of God, God's divine presence as king over us, is expressed on Shabbat even more. And in fact, the Rebbe actually also, quotes from Kabbalistic sources that it's not only about the 6 and 7 days of creation, but it's also about the millennias of the world. Right now, we're in the 6th millennia. We're in the year 5784, which means we're getting close we're closer to the end of our millennia, but every millennia, every 1,000 years is also another pocket, another expression of a different character of God. So the first millennia was the attribute of kindness, of chesed in the world. And that's actually why the first generation, the first 1,000 years, they were worthy of all the benefits that they got. And yet they lived longer than in any other time of history. They had better life than any other time of history, and yet they were corrupted people. They were undeserving of it. So why did they have it? So it says God sustained them on his kindness alone. There's a verse in many of you are familiar with it. Hodu Lashem Kitov, Kilolam Chasto. Kilolam Chasto means for his kindness is everlasting. And really that's used to explain the first 1,000 years of God's creation. God sustained them on his kindness alone. It was a time of God's kindness in the world, that they were undeserving, and yet still God. Second millennia was a millennia of Yorah, discipline. And that's why the two major points of that second millennia was the flood, which punished them for their wrongdoing, and the Tower of Babel, God separated them all because they were unserving. So the second 1,000 years was more the attribute Gevura of God emphasized. The third 1,000 years is considered the generation of Torah, the millennia of Torah.
Yeah, Rabbi, your voice is breaking up. Are you having that problem, Nancy? For some reason, for the past, I don't know, 60 seconds, it's becoming increasingly harder to understand you.
Okay, good to know. Merge it. Okay, so the third 1,000 years, the third millennia of creation, is the millennia of Torah. That's when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people took the Torah to the next level, kept on studying the Torah, brought it to Israel. The third millennia is considered the millennia of Torah, which is highlighted by the third expression of God, of Tiferet, of harmony, which is the synthesis, the combination, the beauty of Chesed and Gevurah. And that's why the Torah was given in the third month, which is the month of Sivan. And the Talmud gives different expressions of the number 3. It was given 3 parts of the Torah, right? The 3 sections of the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, Tanakh. And it was given to a 3-part nation of Cohen, Levi, and Israel. And it was given by the third person, which was Moshe, because he was the youngest of 3 siblings after Miriam and Aaron, his older brother and sister. So the way we see, the past few minutes, I've been explaining the expressions of God within the 6 days of creation, how every day had a different expression of God, or every millennia also had a different expression of God. But this is relative to us. Meaning the way we see the expressions of God, we see it as this millennia was kinder, or this millennia, or this day was a day of light. It was a day of kindness. We could also see people as a person that's a good communicator, or a person that perhaps is more sensitive, or a person that's more strict. So we define people by the character trait that they have, and it's usually one or the other. Is this person kinder? Is this person stricter? Is this person better at communication? Or is this person more sensitive? Is this person a humble person? Is this person a person with endurance? All those are different expressions of the attributes that I'm talking about. But from our perspective, we look at the person as one more than the other. But if you look at it from a higher perspective, it's all one. Meaning, if you're looking at it from the teacher perspective, to use the example I gave last week, from the teacher, it's all one. If you remember, I gave the example that when a teacher shares a parable or an illustration or a story with the class, the students could get caught up in the story. But by the teacher, if you're able to crawl into the teacher's mind, you see how it's all part of a flow. It's all one within the teacher. It's all one idea. So by God, in the source, from a higher perspective, all these expressions are one with God. It's like the sun rays that are in the source, that the rays are not highlighted. All you see is the source. And therefore, in fact, you'll see in every day of creation, you'll see a combination of an opposite expression. What I mean by that is, till now, I was telling you that the first day of creation was light, and therefore the emphasis was kindness. But in truth, it wasn't just light, it was also darkness. God created light and dark, heaven and earth. So in that place of kindness, you also see a different character, because from the source, it's all one. Or, for example, on the second day of creation, when God separated the waters, it's more the idea of gevura, God's discipline and justice. But the point of separating the waters was in order to reveal the dry land. So within that discipline of separating, you also see a kindness taking place, which is revealing, exposing, and uncovering dry land, which is the idea of kindness. So within every expression of God, you also have in Hebrew what's called hitkalalut, which is an inclusion or a merging together or a combination of other sefirot as well. Okay.
What's the fourth and fifth millennium?
I didn't go through them, right? I only did the three because those are easier for me to explain.
Okay,
No. So the fourth would be what's I think known as the era of the kings of the Jewish people. And the era of the kings is known as Netzach. The fourth Sephira of God is one of victory or endurance. Not always is that a positive thing. What that means is sometimes a person has endurance on doing the wrong thing. It's unhealthy. There were certain kings by the Jewish people that they were so direct and have that endurance in doing the wrong thing with the Jewish people, and that was totally incorrect. That I didn't say the fifth yet, right? I'm just going to put this back. So I want to tell you more about what the Alter Rebbe is, not what he says, but what he's saying. That's a teacher of mine would say, so that's what the Alter Rebbe says. But now let's tell you what the Alter Rebbe is saying, like the idea that's trying to be communicated here, or the underlying theme. Our Rebbe once explained exactly around this time of year. This time of year is very special on the calendar. It's the month of miracles. It's the month of Kislev. And specifically next week, next Shabbat is going to be the 19th of Kislev, which is considered the big day for Chassidus, for Chabad. And the Rebbe, our Rebbe would have long Farbrengens, very beautiful Farbrengens. But one of the longest Farbrengens of all times by the Rebbe was on the 19th of Kislev. If I'm not mistaken, it was 1962. And the Rebbe Farbrengen, if I'm not mistaken, it was from 8:30 p.m. until 5:30 a.m. So we're talking about some 9 hours of teaching nonstop, a maimer, which is a Hasidic discourse, and talks of the Rebbe. And during one of these talks, the Rebbe explained chapter 10 of Shar Yichud V'Emunah, chapter 10 of our chapter right now that we're learning. And why did the Rebbe choose to explain it then? Is because, like I've mentioned previously, Rabbi Weinberg, who was a rabbi student of the Rebbe, he would teach a Tanya class on the radio every Saturday night. And in the early 60s, he was up to this chapter 10, where he was teaching it on the radio, and he had a lot of questions and trying to understand it. So to answer his questions, the Rebbe at the Farbrengen that Shabbat, he explained the chapter, he explained the theme of the chapter and answered all of his questions. So I just want to tell you, a little bit of what the Rebbe said at this Farbrengen, and really with the heart of what the Alter Rebbe is trying to communicate in this chapter. So, and I think this is just so relevant, especially for the time we're in now. So it really resonated with me in studying this idea. The Rebbe explains, if you were to explain what's the difference between emet and sheker, between truth and falsehood, between what's right and what's wrong, truth and false. Obviously, there's, you could explain a lot of differences. But the way the Rebbe explains it is, truth is, even if no one knows it or no one is talking about it, it's still true. It's still there. A lie or false only has substance when people are talking about it and buying into it, believing it. As soon as people are not talking about it, the lie disappears. Meaning the only substance of a lie is when people buy into it. If people found out it's a lie, it vanishes. It's gone. No one. So the only substance is people buying into it, people talking about it. As soon as it is exposed, it vanishes. So actually, two things happen. Number one, the lie vanishes, falsehood is exposed and disappears. And number two, it actually strengthens the truth, because the contrast between the lie and the truth is highlighted when the lie is exposed. So therefore, that contrast sharpens and elevates the truth. People will embrace the truth more after a lie gets exposed. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, when a lie happens, two things. When a lie is exposed, two things happen. Number one, the lie vanishes, the falsehood disappears, and number two, the truth gets elevated. The truth is strengthened. So the wrong goes away and the right becomes more right. I find this to be so relevant, for the time we're in now. You could really see who's on the side of truth and who's not. So until now, it was, more under wraps, or more, it wasn't exposed yet. But now, the more it's coming out to the surface, it says when Mashiach, I just want to explain it in other terms. I think this is just, it says prophecies about when Mashiach comes. And if anyone has been unfortunately, if you have been to a Jewish funeral, we quote a verse from Tanakh, from the prophets, that says, Bila hamavet lanetzach, that when Mashiach comes, death will be swallowed up forever, will be obliterated. Or it says, Ruach hatuma avir min haaretz, that the spirit of impurity will be removed from the earth, will vanish. Klipa, which is false, impurity, which is false, death, which is only a facade of exile, all that will vanish. Therefore, there will be no more death when Mashiach comes. There will be no more impurity. There will be no more lies. Because the only way lie and falsehood has substance is if people buy into it. When Mashiach comes, it will be vanished totally. It won't be set to the side. It'll totally be obliterated, because there'll be no more room for it, because truth will be exposed and the lie will be exposed, I should say, and it will vanish. And that's why, it's even though it's for oftentimes it's demoralizing seeing the voice of the world, that we hoped would have a moral compass and a moral whatever, and just to see a lie being more expounded. Some encouraging words is that means we're getting closer to Mashiach. And I gave him my weekly email. I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I was talking about my Toyota Prius, which I have a 2007 Toyota Prius. If I visited your house, you've probably heard it pull in. It makes a nice noise. It just lost its catalytic converter by a thief, and a couple months ago. So it's definitely on its last leg, and it's making a good noise as on its way out, which is how most lies, before it gets exposed, it makes one last hurrah, it makes one last big noise. That's how it is with lies. But once the lie is exposed, it vanishes. Like when a lie is exposed, you don't think about it a few years later. Like it's gone. You don't even remember it because it's totally vanished. Truth remains even if no one knows it. Even if no one is talking about the truth, it's there. So I guess my point is, when Mashiach comes, all that will remain is truth. And people or things that were lies will vanish. Impurity will vanish. Death will vanish, because all that is part of the side of klipa, which doesn't have any substance to it. It's only sin and darkness that brings it out. Lies are like dreams. Oh, exactly. It's just an hallucination. Exactly. But it's not real. Well said. Actually, in the book of Psalms, right? Hayinu kechalmin, when we're like dreamers, is during a time of exile. It's like a dream. But to explain this a little more in Chassidus, and we'll end with this idea. In Kabbalistic or Hasidic terminology, there's a term that you've heard me use before, which is bitul, which means um, nullification. And now I've been using more of a term called yichud, which is unification. One is nullifying, one is unifying. Both are true and both are needed, but it just depends from what perspective. Nullification is basically saying you have no identity. You're what you stand for is a lie. So therefore, nullify yourself, nullify your ego, as Robin was saying before, and burn out or vanish all the empty parts, nullify the parts that are lies, and all you're left with is God. So, like before Pesach, before Passover, we do a ceremony that's called Biur Chametz, which means burning the chametz, burning the leavened bread. So anything that's not correct needs to be nullified. It's called burning, taking it away. And all you're left with is the matzah. All you're left with is the holiday. So there's character traits that need to be nullified. There's areas of improvement that the way you improve is by nullifying the bad traits. All you're left with is the good. So what we're saying is remove your identity, remove your ego, and all you'll be left with is godliness. That's one perspective. Another perspective is not bitul, which is nullifying ourselves. Another perspective is yichud, which is unifying ourselves. What that means is it's a different perspective of saying you do exist, but not because of yourself. You exist because of what you are united with. So strengthen your unity with God, and it will expose your truth, which is you do exist. So one is saying you don't exist, because if you stand for falsehood, you have to nullify that. So nullify the ego, and all you're left with is godliness. Another perspective is saying you do exist, but not because of what you stand on yourself, but because of who you are united with, or what you are united with. So bitul is like the lie that's disappearing. So you vanquish the lie, and all you'll be left with, it sharpens the truth. Yichud, or unification, is truth. And truth, when you are connected with the source, it becomes stronger. So I still have to bring it into the chapter. There's two ways of unity. And the first half of the book, and the second half of the book, is talking about two different ways of unity. The first half of the book is talking about unity of God within creation. The way the Alter Rebbe talks about that is by exposing the lies of the world and showing that it's not a real existence on its own. It's like a dream. A world could only exist dependent on God. So therefore, nullify worlds, and you will expose the truth of it, which is really godliness. The world could only be vivified with the speech of God, with the letters of God, giving it life. It needs constant existence, a constant creation of godly energy in existence. So it hinges on the bitul of the world. The way the world unites with God is by exposing the fallacy of world, that the only true existence of world is God. So by nullifying world, you show the unity of God. But the second half of the book is actually strengthening the expressions of God, or strengthening by, if you expose the connection between the expression and the source, you're showing that unity. It's a much deeper way of unity. So I guess I don't know if I'm explaining this all the way. There's two ways, there's two tails over here. One is bitul, which is nullifying, and all you're left with is the truth. Another is unity, which is if you strengthen the unity, you become stronger. The second half of the book is talking about the strength of the connection between God and his expressions, God and his tools, God and his light. When you strengthen that, you'll see how all of that is really one with God. All of that is God. Like you could have a connection between one person and another. Sometimes that connection, depending on who the source is of the connection, that connection could either make the person feel better about themselves, or feel worse. Let me explain this. You could have a relationship, let's say a friendship. There could be a toxic friendship where a person feels, I'm a nobody unless I'm with you. So therefore, I need to be with you because otherwise I'm a nobody. That's the first method, that the world is a nothing. The only truth of the world is the godliness in it. But the second way of what we're explaining, and it's a much more powerful way, is the way that the strength of the friendship, I see my power because I'm with you. It's not that you're great and I'm tagging along, is that my strength comes out when I'm with you. I see who I truly am, my power, when I'm with you. That's the second half of the book. It's how it's expressing how everything around is really Hashem Echad, is really one with God. So that's the power of unity. Okay, we're gonna wrap up. I know I'm explaining a lot of deep stuff over here. Okay, so just the last point over here for chapter 10, the way we look at worlds should be one of the tool, that the world and everything we're doing in the world, it's not that it doesn't exist, but that its whole existence is to be connected with God. So the way I am in world, the way I'm in my work life, the way I am in my eating, my sleeping, mundane things, it's not that it doesn't exist. I need it to exist. I need to live. But the whole existence is an expression of godliness. So they are a means to an end. The end is the connection with God. The means of it is by eating healthy, by doing exercise, by giving charity, by doing work, by Torah and mitzvot. When I'm involved in a Torah and mitzvot, that is the end. It's not a means to an end. Torah and mitzvot itself is my connection with God. It's the unity that I'm bringing out within my connection with God. Okay, so just to explain I just want to try to see if I could read a little bit inside with you. If you have the book in chapter 10, is on 147. We'll just try to read a few practical lessons and end the lesson with this. 147 in the book is chapter 10. We have a practical lesson that says as follows. A good example we have to illustrate God's attributes is sunlight. But to compare God to a luminous body is a useful comparison in one respect only, to help us contemplate how God is one with his attributes. So if you use the example of sunlight, you'll see how God and his attributes, God and his expression is all one, just like the rays of the sun is actually one with the source, with the ball of the sun itself. We'll go now to Sefer Hayichud on page 149 at the bottom, a Hasidic thought, and he explains like this. All of God's attributes are one, and each one of them is included in the other. He acts in all of them as one, or he acts in one and includes all of them within it. So if you remember, it's a powerful line. If you remember, I explained that on the first day of creation, which was God creating light, It's not only kindness, all the other attributes are included in that one as well. And the same is with every millennia or every day of creation, you have all of them within each one of them, all of God's sefirot within each one. Now we'll continue on 181, another Hasidic thought. Each one of the sefirot or divine attributes contains all the others. They are always united with their emanating source in absolute unity. It's a powerful one. And the last one for the day is on page 152. And this is a practical lesson. Let's hope we could, learning about unity and bitul, let's hope we could take away some lesson. On 152, true unity means that each of God's attributes contains all the others. When one attribute is at work, you can always discern the others in the background too, if you know how to look. So if you remember, I explained before, you have a tzaddik and the rest of us. The reason why why we are connected to a tzaddik is because when we see something going on in our life, it could be a time of crisis. The tzaddik could help us see a bigger picture, how the other attributes of God are at play here also. And the tzaddik sees the bigger picture. He sees like the teacher perspective, whereas we just see the student perspective. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya is helping us see the bigger, broader perspective, how all the attributes are contained within one. And if we see one attribute, there's all the other ones at play in the background. All of them are united with each other and united with God. So that's the idea of unity within God and his expressions, which is the deeper meaning of Hashem Echad, God, God is one.
Wow,
Okay,
that's great. I see that as a tzaddik looking at light and seeing the rainbow.
He sees all of them as one.
All the colors,
exactly.
all the colors.
Beautiful. I've been giving a Wednesday evening class, and for Steve and Vivian that you're at the class, there's no class tonight. It's going to be next week. But in the second class, we spoke about the rainbow of the story of Noah, and why was it the rainbow that was the symbol of God's covenant? Because the rainbow is actually nothing new. The rainbow is only the reflection. I don't remember the scientific expressions the way we explained it in the class.
Light is just broken into its elements. It's all the different
prism, right? The prism.
wavelengths.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
prism, right? A prism.
So the tzaddik is able to see it, and we were only able to see the colors, but the tzaddik could see how it's all one as one light. And that's a beautiful way of explaining it here. Thank you, Robin. Okay, we'll end that with today's class. Yasher koach, and everyone have a great Thanksgiving.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is so
Bye,
profound.
Nancy. Bye, Robin. Bye, Steve.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.